Eric Coyer-Fried is an architect. He is director of sustainability for Canon Design, and cool as hell. If you guys were at pizza last night, we got to hang out with him at pizza. So Eric, close the day and take it away.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. You've all been sitting for a long time. So if you want to stand up and stretch and breathe, you know, that's allowed. It'd be welcome, actually, if you think about it. Just don't breathe out because, you know, COVID. But you know, breathe in all you want. All right. Well, first of all, thank you to Katie, thank you to Haley for putting this together. There was a tremendous amount of work on their part creating this and making this happen, and hopefully they'll get some sleep this weekend. But as you heard, my name is Eric. I don't know about you, but I've been spending the last few years indoors. And so I went from speaking at like 60, 70 events a year on the road to just being in my house. And I kind of got used to it. So I was gonna, like, as a joke, just as a joke, I was gonna send a cardboard cutout and say I'm not coming. And then, but the cardboard cutout I had was of Harry Styles, and they didn't find that funny at all. But then when I thought about it, I thought I'm at home, I'm on these meetings all the time, these Zooms, and just the day in, day out, it got to me, and I thought, I need to get out. And I had read every book on my bookshelf, and you know, I was out of stuff to do at this point. So I'm here, the pace here. Do you guys remember like 3 years ago when Thanos snapped his fingers and we all kind of disappeared for a while? You remember when that happened? Well, a weird thing happened. It gave companies pause. It gave companies an opportunity that they didn't know that they needed, which was a chance to reimagine what are they doing with all this. So at Canon Design, that's what we're doing. We have multiple clients that have asked us to say, what is the future of education? What is the future of healthcare? What is the future of cancer care? And we're trying to figure that out. And we're getting there. But it's slow. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you a little bit of that work. It is a work in progress. It changes constantly. And we're always improving in it. And we're doing it in partnership with our clients. And so the talk that Katie saw that she wanted me to include, that was about 30 minutes. And then she had all this exciting stuff that she wanted me to add, which is about 15 minutes. And if you're good at math, that's 45 minutes. And she said, but you only have 25 minutes to present it. So I guess that's what I'll do. I'll talk quickly. So I've been an environmentalist for 30 years. I know I look young, but I moisturize. But I've been doing it for 30 plus years. And the big realization that I had over these last few years is that we have failed. We failed. We ended up in the exact spot we did not want to be. 30 years of warnings, dire warnings, telling you that this is where we didn't want to be, and we ended up there. And so we failed. And I'm not just talking about stuff like this, like whatever the hell this is. I'm talking about, and we are at a food conference, so we should talk about this offline. And whatever the heck is going on with mayonnaise right now, it needs to stop. But you know, as an environmentalist, you see the world in absurd ways. It is an absurd place. This didn't get a laugh at all, really? But here's what I mean by we failed. This was the cover of the New York Times. This is June 1988. I just graduated high school, so you can do the math. And Jim Hansen, chief climatologist at NASA, had testified in front of Congress at the behest of Al Gore about the impact of climate change. And in that conference, and you can watch it online, he said, if we do not do something about this, in 30 years, we're going to start really feeling the painful effects of climate change. And 33 years to the month, this was the cover of the New York Times. Climate change comes for all of us. We failed. What else could you say? This is where we did not want to be, and so we failed. I almost feel like I should apologize to all of you, really. Last year, the IPCC put out its 6th and final assessment report, what's been called a Code Red for humanity. One little tidbit in that report, if you want to read it, and it's online, is that there's already enough greenhouse gases in the air to blow past our target of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Do not read it at night. You'll get weird, freaky dreams. Read it during the day, it's easier. So all of this stuff, 30 years of warning, 30 years of data, pure science really telling everybody that this is about to happen, and it seems the only advancement that we've made around climate change is that now we have paint colors named after it. Is this our future? Is this really where we're headed? I'm an architect. I don't deal with food. I mean, I like it, but I eat it, but I don't get to deal with food as much as I'd like. I deal with buildings. And what I've discovered, much like what I'm sure you've discovered, is that they're based on a set of assumptions that are no longer true and maybe never have been. And yet we're still building buildings like it's 1955. 6-foot-tall Don Draper-looking guys in suits, and that's why you're always cold at the office, basically. Basically, that's what we're doing all the time. And yet the world has changed. Just look at what happened this past summer in terms of the world changing. I can't read this at all. $2 trillion worth of damage inflicted by US emissions alone. You saw the heat wave in Britain. I don't know if you know any British people, but they catch fire in the sun. They don't like to be outside. We saw there were so many climate disasters going on that we had to publish a list in the paper about them. In Spain and Portugal, 2,000 people died just from the heat wave alone, which is tragic, of course. Salt Lake City is drying up. It's now Salt Lake bin. I don't know what you'd call it, really. And then the Arctic is warming way more quickly than we anticipated because of these kind of recompounding effects. In addition, we've had 5 1,000-year rain events this summer, at which point you say it's not a 1,000-year event anymore. All the 1,000-year events are now 5-year events. All the 100-year events are now 2- or 3-year events. So they're misnomered at best, right? And Europe has had the worst drought in 500 years. China, the worst drought in 2,000 years. And then at the same time, the Greenland ice sheet, which we feared would fall off, if it does, could raise sea level by a foot, which here in Boston means this is underwater, right? So 2022 is not even over yet, and we already know it's going to be one of the hottest years on record. In fact, the 5 hottest years on record are the last 5 years. And you can just keep saying that now as a talking point because it doesn't change. Look at all your faces. I'm sorry. I know this happened to be. There's jokes later. It gets better. So if you're depressed, and you certainly have the right to be, I recently had this quote, and I shared it with my entire team on Monday because I love this quote so much. But in it, it's Eckhart Tolle, and he says, if uncertainty is unacceptable to you, then it turns into fear. But if it is perceived acceptable, it turns into increased aliveness, alertness, and creativity. And I think that's where my head's at. People come up and say to me, are you depressed all the time? And I have jokes and stuff but no, I'm not. I'm more excited and exhilarated now than I have in my 30 years because we've hit rock bottom, I think, is kind of how I see it. And so now we have nowhere to go but up. And what faces all of you is that the 3 big problems that we need to solve for this century, and we need to do it in this decade, are buildings, transportation, and food. And not only do we need to solve them, but we need to solve them equitably for everybody, right? And not only do we need to solve them, but there is a $30 trillion industry making sure that you don't change things. A $30 trillion industry that likes the status quo. But yet, climate change has come for all of us. So with all of our clients, we've felt that they've felt these drivers upon them. So just in the last few years, there's been a tone shift in how they talk about climate change. It's not me pushing it on them, it's them bringing it up. It's them putting it into their RFPs. It's them saying, if we're building this building, it needs to be resilient. It needs to do this, it needs to do that. They're way ahead of us now, which is great. So they're feeling these driving effects. And virtually all of them have sustainability plans. So what I do, and I advise you to do the same, is I read their sustainability plans, and the very first slide that we have at the very first meeting is, okay, you want to be carbon neutral by 2030? That's 86 months from today. How is this building going to get you there? And if they don't have an answer, then we work out how to do that. And for some of our clients, we're developing climate action plans to do that. But once you do that, and I feel like we have that underway, what about everything else? What about the idea of a building that's truly restorative? And if you think about the air, 90% of the world's population is breathing polluted air. And the indoor air is worse than the outdoor air. The indoor air is 12 times more polluted. I mean, look at this room. It's a windowless box. I can't wait to get the hell out of here, to be honest with you. And yet we found that just doing simple things like putting an air purifier in a classroom improves student performance by as much as reducing class sizes by a third. Just simple little things. This bad air is attributed to asthma, and it's linked to Alzheimer's and heart disease and strokes and all sorts of other diseases. And when you're born, you're no longer born pure, unfortunately. Because of persistent toxic chemicals, you're now born pre-polluted. Just living near a coal plant can affect your neurons in utero. We've seen on bad air days that surgical outcomes go down, crime rates go up, and on bad air days, even the stock market does worse on a bad air day. And yet we keep pumping pollutants into the air. And then when we design our buildings, the idea is that we hermetically seal the whole thing. Closed windows, closed air, no access to the outside. Especially in a hospital, you're treated like a prisoner, oddly enough. And yet I feel like everybody deserves access to nature, access to views, access to light, access to air. In addition, what we found is just in the last few years that people's attitudes towards their own health has changed because of all these different trackers, because of all these little devices that let them monitor their thing. There's this thing that we did. I already knew I didn't like cilantro, but apparently my DNA knows I don't like cilantro. And every middle-aged white woman in America is now doing this to figure out what her peanut allergy is or whatever, right? So it's amazing. Plus, we've all gotten used to shoving things up our nose to test ourselves. So our relationship to nutrition and food and health has changed just in the last few years. And in that context, all of our clients are now saying, what is the big technology that's going to transform my industry? What's the next big thing in healthcare that's going to transform my industry? And they're all thinking digital technology. But there is a technology that they're missing, a 3.8 billion a year old technology called nature. Biology, chemistry, physics are technologies, and we should deploy them at scale to build healthy, regenerative, restorative buildings that we need. If I were to ask all of you what is a healthy building, I'd probably get just as many responses. Everybody would have a different opinion about it. But my definition is that the more time you spend in the building, the better you'd feel. That is the best thing I could come up with. My friend Rich Corsi, who was dean at Portland State, he has this great stat, and he says that Americans spend more time inside than certain species of whales spend underwater. And it's true. We spend about 90% of our time indoors, and you can put any toxic chemical you want indoors except asbestos or lead paint. And all you have to do is you put a little warning label on the box. But when they build the building, they throw those boxes away, so nobody really sees it. So it's kind of a problem. And it reminded me of this quote from Einstein. And in it he says that a clever person solves a problem, but a wise person solves it, avoids it. It reminded me of this, this old adage called the Cobra effect. I don't know if you've ever heard about this. When the British colonized India, there were too many cobras to their liking. They don't like cobras, apparently. And so what they did was they put a bounty out for every cobra. Bring me a cobra head, and they'll pay you money. And so the Indians, being entrepreneurial sorts that they are, started breeding cobras. In other words, the very problem they were trying to solve, they made worse because they were making a fortune breeding cobras. And now this is what we do in green buildings. We incentivize through checklists different metrics. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody, but how many times have we deliberately put in wood in a project that didn't have any in order to get the wood credit? Or deliberately put in recycled plastic when we didn't have any to get the recycled plastic credit? So metrics can make really bad targets at times. They can almost work against you. That's the Cobra effect, really. Think about the typical healthcare experience. Long waits, low comfort, high stress. You can smell the stress in the air. Think about the typical school experience. Bad air, bad light, uninspiring spaces, lots of waste. Think about the typical office experience. Bad air, bad light, no connection to your colleagues. And this got us thinking, if we start to change what we measure and change our metrics of success, we could change the world. So that's what we started doing. Because think about how we normally measure success in a building. It's usually cost per square foot. Sometimes it's revenue per square foot. Sometimes it's payback. But how could we measure success in a building? Couldn't we also measure things like patient recovery time, reduced stress level, staff retention? Those things also have value. Couldn't we monetize those as well? And how should we measure success in a building? Shouldn't we also measure the amount of energy we produce, the amount of carbon we sequester, and the amount of species we provide a habitat for? Those things also have value. So I started looking at the metrics that we use every day. And in the architecture industry, we use these metrics. We like them. They're very clear. They're very quantifiable. We can touch them and taste them. We know what they are. But they're one type of language. And so we'd be talking to our clients in this language. But what our clients care about is different, right? What they care about is more on the financial side of things. And they would have a different language. So now you have two different people speaking two different languages. They care about OpEx, CapEx, IRR, ROR, all these acronyms that architects normally don't speak. And then if you're designing a healthcare facility, what the doctors care about is the patients. So now you have 3 different groups speaking 3 different languages, and none of them are really listening to each other. So it made us realize that our metrics are not only off, but they're probably bad. And what we needed was like a missing link, like something that would connect the two. And for us, that doesn't get a laugh either. Don't you guys have kids and we're forced to watch this? So what we needed was this idea that we're going to work together to design these outcomes, and then we're going to design the building toward those outcomes. I'm not selling them on sustainability. I'm selling them the outcomes that sustainability brings. And I start with 3 big buckets that are deliberately vague and evocative. And from this, we work together to map out what these metrics should be. And then we design the building towards those outcomes. And we use sustainability to do it, but we use a lot of other things too. And we all know it's very clear what the outcomes are, the purpose of the building. We're doing a school for CSU right now. One of the outcomes is Instagrammable moments. And at first, I was rolling my eyes like Katie just did. But when you think about it, an Instagrammable moment means that you've done your placemaking well. You've designed it in a way that people want to interact with it, and they want to stop and take a picture. And then they want to promote your school to do it. So at first, I was like rolling my eyes. Then I'm like, oh my God, that's a really great metric. Brilliant. So if you do these metrics correctly, there's also a financial payback to it. So I'm not selling them on sustainability. I'm selling them the outcomes that sustainability brings. Bless you. So let's think about how buildings normally are. The y-axis is everything from restorative to consumptive. The x-axis is everything from degenerative to regenerative. If we're really being honest with ourselves, this is where buildings are. They are destructive. They are consumptive. The more we build, the worse off we are. Now, as an architect, that's kind of hard to deal with. And LEED and all those other green building rating systems, they've really been trying to get us here. They've been trying to be less bad. I think ultimately to try to get here, to be neutral. But I don't want to be bad. I want to be good. So what would good actually look like? Wouldn't that be designing for human wellness, designing for health, designing to be truly restorative and regenerative? The more time you spend in it, the better you feel. That's how I got to this point. So what would that look like? It means that the building itself would somehow feed you nutrients, that it would adapt itself to your physiology. The more time you spend in it, the better you feel. This is a food program, and you're already thinking, why is this architect talking to me about buildings? Well, we're looking at the intersection of food, community, transport, and construction. So I'll give you an example. We're designing a healthcare system in the Midwest. We did an abundance exercise. What do we have an abundance of? And it usually starts off real snarky. Well, there's a lot of cold. Yes, there's a lot of cold in the Midwest. What else? Well, there's a lot of cow poop. Okay, write that down. Well, we got a lot of farms. We'll write that down too. Well, so that led to, we are now going to power this hospital with cow poop and ag waste. Because that's what we have in abundance. It's free energy if we tap into it. We're doing another project where we're building the building out of these kind of ag waste straw panels. So we're growing straw next to the site. We're going to build a little factory next to it and then build the building. But then after the building's built, the factory could stay open and add to the local economy, right? That's we call it a legacy project. So given all of this context, all this stuff swirling around in our heads, what next for us was obvious. That if the building is supposed to feed you nutrients, that means that the facility is part of the treatment. The more time you spend in it, the better you feel. That somehow it would be part of your patient journey. That when you'd walk into the building, it would somehow light you up, activate your biology, whatever you want to say. And this idea is not anything really new. It's just a combination of lots of disparate ideas around neuroarchitecture and evidence-based design and biophilic design. But these groups don't really talk to each other. So we started just connecting the dots between them. The more time you spend in it, the better you feel. That somehow the building would be part of this process of healing and curing. And so we started with one client, University of Chicago Medical Center, who's building a new cancer center. And they hired us to design the future of cancer centers. And we thought, well, that's perfect, because there's already patients there. They're already being monitored, right? So we'll do it for a cancer center. But then it expanded to now we're basically just pushing it on everybody. So that's our big idea, using biology as a technology to manipulate their physiology. And right now we've broken it into 6 buckets: systems, senses, cycles, signals, biomes, and genomes. And if we do our job correctly, in a school, it could boost student performance on test scores or reading comprehension. In a healthcare setting, it could boost immune response or medical efficacy, reduce recovery times. In an office, it could even boost collaboration. So what does this look like? And in case you're wondering, what are these 6 buckets? Well, the first one, systems, is basically designing for the 12 physiological systems that we all have in our body, right? Senses refers to the not 5, but 30 senses that we all contain, the full spectrum of human experience. Cycles refers to the 24 hours in a day, what we call a circadian rhythm. Signals refers to the 12 neurotransmitters in our brain that control mood and appetite and immune response. Biomes refers to the 2 primary large microbiomes in your gut and in your brain that help you live. And then genomes refers to the 4 nucleopeptide proteins that make up all life on Earth, what you would call DNA. We're going to grow materials, and we're going to start with the systems. These are the 12 physiological systems of the human body. You all have them. And what we started doing was mapping out what we could do in the architecture to affect those systems, things that would have a deliberate effect on each of these systems, and turned it into a toolkit of sorts. Now, if you're designing a cancer center, being able to affect somebody's endocrine system or lymphatic system suddenly becomes a very powerful treatment tool. But we started mapping out all the different systems that we have. And in case you're wondering, no, we're not going to mess with anybody's reproductive or urinary system, not yet. But we could, it's there. And then we turn this into a toolkit. And then we work with our providers to map out where in the patient journey you'd want to activate each of these things. And so this becomes a very powerful design tool. The facility is part of the treatment. And then that turns into a catalog of design strategies that we're using to manipulate that. So when we make a wall purple, we're not making it purple because we like purple, but because we know the specific physiological effect that purple has on human health. Now, when we come to senses, I'm reminded of an old saying that one of my professors used to say. He was an old Italian guy, and I spent a year in Rome, and I'm not going to do the accent, but he used to say, you remember a building, he used to do this a lot, you remember a building by how it makes you feel. And that really stuck with me, because I agree with it. But when you think of your feelings, you think of the big 5, right? That's what we're taught in elementary school. Hear, smell, taste, touch, sight. The truth is that the human brain is much more sophisticated than that, and we have a full spectrum of senses. There are more than 30 senses that we all have. You have a sense of direction. I mean, some of you more than others, but you have a sense of time. You have a sense of pressure. You have proprioception. Like, I can grab my earlobe without looking. I know where my body is, right? You know when you're moving. You have a sense of magnetism, believe it or not. So what if we were designed for that full spectrum of human sensory perception? Now, if this sounds familiar, it's because the retailers have been doing it to you for decades, right? IKEA deliberately makes the store feel like a maze, so it triggers your fear response. And so you grab this because you're like, I'm never going to see this again. Costco reinforces their membership model, right? They make everything look like a warehouse. They put the big ticket items up front. The TVs are up front. Starbucks is really great at this. They make the store very, very dark by retail standards, and the cash wrap is overlit. So you're drawn to the light like a moth. And then they grind beans in the store to lure you in. They don't need to do that. They do it because they know the benefits that it does. And then, of course, McDonald's is the worst, because just looking at the logo, people's mouths water. And if you're ever in an airport, it's the one with the longest line, which annoys the heck out of me. But anyway, so it raises this question, what if the building could actually do this? What if the building could make you feel things? Which leads us to cycles. Now, our bodies adapt throughout the day. It's called a circadian rhythm. You might have seen this chart before, right? Our body changes throughout the day. Your blood pressure starts rising when you wake up and then hits its peak in the evening. But you might not have seen this chart before. These are the proteins and chemical reactions that also occur throughout the day. I'm not a doctor, but I know what cholesterol is because I'm in my 50s. But otherwise, what if we work with our providers to map out when in that circadian rhythm we'd want to do treatment? So just as we're doing energy modeling and daylight modeling, we're now doing circadian modeling, and we're mapping out the different color hues throughout the day on the patient's experience. And it's really easy, actually. We just don't know if it works yet, but it's really easy to model. And this is kind of what it looks like. This is CHOP in Philadelphia. Same room, just different color temperatures. Signals refers to the 12 neurotransmitters in your brain that control mood and appetite and sex drive and immune response. And it's a very powerful tool, right, as you know. When you're designing a cancer center, everyone arriving at the cancer center is terrified. They're either about to have their worst day of their life, or they just did and now they're starting their treatment. So what if we were to design the reception desk to deliberately trigger serotonin in their brain to make them feel calm and at ease? What if we were to design the treatment rooms to deliberately trigger dopamine to make them feel motivated and stay on course? Now, if this sounds manipulative to you, and it is this really any different than what you folks do every single day with your coffee and your supplements and all that other jazz that you do? No, it's the same thing. I've been popping these happy worms like nobody's business. They're fantastic. They're really good. So yes, it's manipulative. I don't care, but it's for good, right? So we're mapping this to the patient journey, working with the providers to figure out when would we want to do this. Think of it this way. It's like the building giving you a free hug. That's really what it's like. Biomes refers to the microbiomes, the two main ones in your gut and in your head. Of all the cells that make up you, only 43% of those cells are human cells. The rest are stowaways. Microorganisms, bacteria, viruses that live on and in you, and they make up you. That's what makes you special. And the majority of them are in your gut and in your brain, but they're there, and you have good bacteria and bad bacteria. Everybody does, and everybody is both. What if we were to design the facility to support the good bacteria? I want to introduce you to an old friend of yours. This is Demodex. He lives on your face. He's here right now in this room with us. He's on your eyelashes. He's really small. You can't see him. And he helps you blink every day. You can call him Dex for short. He'll be with you when you go to bed tonight. So if you're grossed out by this, punch yourself in the face because it's your own fault, basically. This is part of what it means to live in a biological ecosystem, right? So that's part of it. And yet our paradigm for hospitals is everything needs to be boiled. Everything needs to be sterile, right? It doesn't make any sense because buildings are disgusting. So what if instead of fighting the bad bacteria, we encourage the good bacteria? What if we put living surfaces in where nutrients go in and benefits come out? So we're experimenting with this too. And then the last one is genomes. And genomes refers to a suite of different things, but the idea is that basically that we would grow healthy building materials. The science has come a really long way through what's called synthetic biology. And if digital programming is ones and zeros, synthetic biology looks at the 4 nucleopeptide proteins, guanine, adenine, cytine, and thymine, AGCT, and they can swap DNA the same way you and I swap MP3 files. It's really kind of remarkable. And I've been working on this for years, and I call it prostruction, which is the opposite of construction. But some people on my team don't like that. They like made with things that grow. That's one that they like. Or one of the other ones that we're workshopping is built with biology. Either way, you get the point. We manipulate DNA to grow the thing that we want. And this is why you've seen stories like this, like your next wall could be made out of mushrooms, because we're growing mycelium fungus to make panels, essentially. And so what I've done is we've mapped out the entire ecosystem of biological building blocks and how nature builds things. And then we've kind of tagged them to their analog equivalents. And then we're doing this for real. And then we mapped out the entire ecosystem of all the bio-based products. And there's a lot of them now. And then, of course, nature has normal, natural products that we use all the time that have a long history in architecture. So we're mapping those out too. These are carbon negative materials. They sequester carbon as they're grown because they're made out of carbon. And then for everything else that normally goes in the building, we're accounting for the carbon, essentially. So that's what I mean by built with biology, essentially. And this is indeed a paradigm shift, right? This kind of switch away from the brute force method of engineering that we normally use to growing and responding to conditions around the site. Ultimately, what I'd like to do is grow the building. So you're in food. Maybe you can plant the seeds of that vision to come forth. So those are the 6 categories we're in right now. Like I said, it's a work in progress. We're constantly evolving it. System, senses, cycles, signals, biomes, and genomes. But it really starts with this shift in your thinking of looking at nature as the ultimate technology. And so we're trying to do this now. And if we fail, I think it's really just due to our lack of imagination. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you for coming. If you want to copy the slides, I'm happy to share. You can text the word green to that number. That is not my phone number. Don't send me weird pictures of your junk or anything. It's an automated thing. But if you send the word green to that number, I'll be able to send you the slides. Otherwise, you can contact me as well. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for putting this on. And
Woo!
Yeah,
Nice. I love it. See, I was right? So we had 2 questions. Well, we had 1 comment. 1 comment was from the online people watching. One was, I'm really depressed in my windowless office right now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Yeah.
The second one, we had a question about balconies. Someone asked a question of, they felt like buildings used to be built with balconies, which created a mini outdoor space up high and around. And in the question basically was, what happened to them? Why don't we build housing and apartment buildings without balconies anymore?
Very easy answer. So a balcony was seen as an amenity, but it was a very expensive amenity. It really adds to the complexity of the structure, specifically around the waterproofing. And in a condo building or apartment building, the #1 source of lawsuits is leaks. So the balcony became an invitation for leaks. So developers hate them. And when they do make them, they make them rather short, as you know. So it's like big enough for you to sit out with your cat, and then that's kind of it. So they never get used. So they get to say you have a balcony, but you don't really have one. But it's all because of litigation.
As many things are.
Yes.
Do we have other questions or comments that anyone would like to ask before we close for the day? Oh, yeah, Julia. Oh, you need a microphone.
One thing that really stuck with me, well, a lot of things stuck with me. It was a phenomenal talk. But one of the things that I think about is metrics, and you were saying sometimes metrics can lead to bad targets. And you mentioned some of the kinds of metrics that could, we could use in the future. But I think some of the things that you mentioned can be hard to quantify. And how do we approach that and encourage businesses and organizations to start creating or collecting data about some of these things that are hard to measure?
Well, that's a great question. And so the example that everybody always thinks of is, how do you quantify happiness, right? So we want to have happy students on campus. Okay, well, what would that look like? And so we'll have a workshop to map out what is the data you're currently collecting, what is data that you could be collecting but is available but hopefully free, and what data is really just we don't have the technology or money to do that. And then so we prioritize the data, and then sometimes the metrics of we want to measure happiness turns into like Instagrammable moments or diversity of enrollment. So we put them through a workshop to map out these outcomes. And I say to them, look, we're agnostic to what these outcomes are. We want you tell us what's important to you. But it is interesting that if you look at a hospital, they live and die by, no pun intended, by this patient response card. And so I always ask them at the hospital, what's on the patient response card? What do they complain about? Well, they complain about the acoustics, they complain about the smell, they complain about the lighting, they complain about the temperature. All that's architecture related. None of it's medical. They don't complain about the doctor and his chest hair, right? They're complaining about the architecture.
And the food.
And the food. They complain about the food a lot, yeah. Nobody likes the food. But we can control so much of that, including the food. So when we're designing hospitals, I always ask them, can we put a green roof as an amenity on the roof? And if we're going to put a green roof, can we grow food? And then if you don't want to take care of it, is there a local university that will partner with you to do that? And the answer is always inevitably yes, right? So it's a win-win for everybody. Now, you can't grow everything, right? You're not going to grow salmon on the roof, but you could grow a salad or part of one. And so it becomes a driver. And then the uptake on that becomes a metric towards happiness. So it's kind of, we're looking at the abstract ways to do that, but it's a great thought exercise, right? What is the killer metric that would transform your life is the question that we ask in the workshop. And they usually stare at me like what? And I'm like, what would make your job easier? So I have a great story. Can I tell a story?
Yes, go for it.
So we're doing hospitals all over. I was talking to a facility administrator for a hospital in Wisconsin. This guy's been doing his job for 30 years. He knows his job inside and out. He's really good at it. He's never done a green building before. And I'm getting nowhere with him. It's like a bad date. It's just he's nothing, he is not interested in me at all. And finally I said, what drives you crazy? He's desperate. What drives you crazy? And he said, plowing snow. And I said, say more about that. And he said, we spend $95,000 a year plowing snow because it's Wisconsin, right? And I said, what if I told you that you would never have to plow snow again? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're about to spend millions of dollars rehabbing an old steam power plant your central plant. You're going to spend all this money trying to keep this thing together, keep it running. What if we retire it, and instead we put in geothermal into the ground? And I'll get warm water out of the ground for free, and then I'll use that to create snowmelt zones on your entire 15-acre campus. And then we'll use that to heat and cool the building all year round. It'll save you $95,000 a year on plowing, plus all the energy that you'd spend on the steam. Now he's a big fan suddenly. Now suddenly he loves green buildings. So it's you got to really work to find what drives them crazy. Remember, the gateway to innovation is pain. So find their pain points, right?
Yeah.
Find their pain points, and then suddenly you can find opportunities to innovate.
Which is a brilliant way to sort of come full circle on the entire thing.
Oh,
So, Eric, Corey, Fried, Yulene, Cruz, I'm so grateful to both of you for being here. All of our panelists, all of our guests, everybody, all of you who joined online. This has been a phenomenal fall 2022 summit for innovation and the Food Nutrition Innovation Institute at Tufts. And thank you all so much.